Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I hope that you are all good. In today's video we are going to be doing a Sims 4 speed build, and for this one I wanted to build a older style British house. So I see this picture on Pinterest and it was of a painting of a house, and I'll see if I can add it in actually if I remember, but it was a older traditional looking British house, and to the side of it they had a walled garden, and I haven't actually tried to do anything like that in The Sims before, so I gave that a shot. I will talk about that a little bit more when we get to it, but I really loved the style of the house. I live in the UK and I don't necessarily have any houses of this style near me, but I've definitely seen them when I've been out and about, and I think it's a really nice look. So in the picture the bottom half of the house had a lot of brickwork, and then in the top you had this kind of paneling. I don't have a clue what this is called, but it was fun to play around with in The Sims because they have quite a lot of swatches. I can't think what off the top of my head what pack these come from. I think it might have been either Get Together or Get Famous, but I really loved the black and white style and it just went really well with the picture. I did obviously do quite a lot of changes to make the design work in The Sims, because a lot of the times when you're replicating something from real life into The Sims you can never get it spot on. And then I also always like to go in and do a lot of tweaks and changes. I never usually do something that looks exactly like the picture. I kind of just use them to get inspiration. So I went in and added in a little bit of stone. They also had that on certain parts of the house. I kind of just did it on one of the bump outs, and then I did my best to try and find a stone foundation that matched this one. It wasn't as matching as I wanted it to, but then sometimes it's nice when things aren't too matchy, especially when you're doing something that's meant to look as though it's, you know, it's old and worn, because for example you might update certain parts of a house over the years, but then you might keep some of the original features. So a lot of the time when I do see older houses in the UK, I do a lot of the time see that they've had modern updates done to them. So I got a lot of the shell done here, as you can see, and I'm kind of just coming in and working on that curb appeal. I wanted to try and get the door to match the image as best as I could, so I couldn't do that as well as I wanted to, but I got it to work. I liked this door, I thought it looked nice. And then in the picture there was lots of small windows, so the only windows that really worked or matched were these ones. So I ended up predominantly using these on all of the windows, apart from that kind of bump out bay one. A lot of the other windows are all the same, which is not something I usually do in The Sims. Usually I would try and do a mix of a few different styles, and I find that you can just make it work, but it just wasn't working for this one, so I went for these ones. I do like the fact that they've got the little upper window open because I feel as though it adds a little bit of realism. I do really wish that in The Sims we had a few more window swatches where some are open and some are closed, like they're the same window, so you could kind of mix and match them throughout the build. But moving on, we're kind of just coming around to the back of the back of the build. Now I didn't have a picture of what the back or side really of the build looked like, so I kind of just improvised. A lot of the time I like to try and add on bump outs and things like that because it adds a little bit of character. Otherwise I feel like although a house might not look quite blocky in real life, if you build it like that in The Sims it ends up looking just like a big block, and like roofing doesn't look right and things like that. So I always like to try and come in and add on some back porches or some little bump outs and things like that, just to make the build look a little bit more interesting. So I ended up having the back door coming off to the side, and then it's more of a side garden rather than a back garden, but I quite liked how that turned out. And then I've jumped on inside because I wanted to get more of the windows placed down, and I always find this a lot easier to do once I've got the internal floor plan done. So I was just coming in, starting on my floor plan, getting that to how I want it to be, so then I can place those windows a little bit better, because obviously I wanted them to match the picture, but then they do still need to work for the build. And then for this build I just had that one picture for inspiration, which was literally a painting of the front of house. So it took a little bit of tweaking and playing around with it. I wanted this to be a family home, so I wanted there to make sure there was enough room for 3 bedrooms. But jumping back onto the outside, one of the things that stood out to me in this style of house was there's always lots of ivy and plants growing up the sides of the building. So I wanted to make sure I come in and do that. Now this was a little bit tricky because a lot of these pieces I was using are from Debug, and they clipped into the walls and into the rooms, especially where I was placing them on the corners of bump outs. So I did have to do a lot of tweaking and playing around to get them to work. I think in the end there was one or two that I had to either resize or remove, and I ended up doing that off camera because I just messed around so much. I had so much footage of this build when it comes to editing, so I had to cut out the bits that were kind of like where I was just testing things or changing my mind, but I tried to leave as much of it in as I could so you could kind of see my thought process and why I did what I did to get the build to work. These particular ivy pieces from Cottage Living, I find these work the easiest, but then sometimes I don't want to cover the whole house in them because it just kind of looks a little bit unrealistic. Another thing that they had in the picture that I really liked was kind of like the little walled brick front garden. So I went in and done that and then added in lots of colourful flowers, and it looked really, really pretty. I would love a front garden like this, just like all the different, I have like a wild patch growing in my front garden that has kind of like poppies and daffodils. It kind of has a lot of seasonal flowers, and I really love it when it's spring, summer and it's all out in bloom and it looks really pretty. So I quite liked doing that. It did feel very British. Then we're going to move on to the side part, which was this walled garden. Now, off camera, I played around with doing a whole walled garden, so basically a square, and it really did not look right. I feel as though there's not enough dimension. Like when you're coming in and adding on the bricks, it just kind of looked like a big square block. I did not like that, so I ended up thinking I would just have this walled piece at the side, because this bit here was exactly how it was in the image that I could see. I couldn't kind of really see the rest of their garden, how it went on, but obviously seeing these houses in real life, a lot of the time the stone walls will go all around their garden. That just did not go well in The Sims. So what I ended up doing was doing this walled piece, but then of course I didn't like how the top of the wall looked. I didn't want to come in and add on a roof piece or anything like that, so I ended up playing around with alt placing as many of these kind of like hanging leaves as I could. And then I attached on the fence and kind of just tried to cover up as much of the bits that didn't look right with landscaping and plants, which again in the picture there was lots of ivy and flowers growing around the walls anyway, so it kind of worked, and it worked really nicely from the inside part of the garden as well. I felt as though it looked quite pretty. We don't come on and do anything else to the garden too further along in the build. I always usually leave my back gardens to the end. And then also you would have seen that I did some terrain paint, a gravelled driveway and things like that, and then I come out of my game, and when I come back in it deleted. So when it comes along to further along in the video, I do end up going in and doing a driveway, but I ended up doing it a bit differently. I couldn't remember how I'd done it because I split doing this build over the week. I kind of done a little bit each evening, so I ended up forgetting how it originally was, but I'm looking back over the footage, I preferred how I did it in the end anyway. But moving on, we have moved on to inside the house. Now for this house, I kind of pictured a family. So I've got a mum, dad, and I built the build for two sons. I kind of pictured one in mind around 5-6 years old, so a child, and then an infant as well. And what I kind of pictured is maybe they were living in like a modern new build house, and then they had their second child and they decided it was time to go out and buy their forever home. So they've bought this older style house. It's a big upgrade from their small new build that they were living in. But because of their budget, they couldn't necessarily come in and renovate a lot of the older features. So I wanted to make it look as though the build itself was quite an older traditional build. Things like the kitchen cabinets, they might have been there since say the 70s, 80s. Same goes for like the bathroom, with things like the, those fixtures and fittings that are a little bit more expensive to do. If you go and buy a house, it's a lot more expensive to rip out the kitchen and bathroom and put new ones in. but then it's not as expensive to say give the place a lick of paint and make it look a little bit more modern or add in modern curtains. So when I was doing this build, I was trying to keep in mind that there's a family who have bought an older traditional house and they've brought their furniture from their previous house, so they've got some modern items, but then they're working with what was in the house. So I kind of hope that comes through and makes sense. But I really enjoyed doing this build and kind of really enjoyed doing that mix of older and modern looks. I really loved how this house turned out. I might actually create a family and add this house into my own gameplay to play with, because I really liked how spacious it was. I could have fitted more rooms in, for example, but I kept it more of a closed but larger size rooms and floor plan. For example, this is quite a big kitchen. I don't usually build kitchens this big, and there is a separate dining room as well. So I really like that side of it, but I did want to make sure that I added plenty of clutter, and I really wanted it to have that lived in feel. I do also place down things for pets as well. So you can have 1 or 2 pets here as well, or you can have as many as you want actually, because I built it for 4 Sims, so it gives you slots for a couple of pets if you wanted. But I kind of just imagined them having a cat and a dog, or 2 cats. So yeah, but like I said, I wanted there to be lots of clutter, and I wanted it to have a really realistic lived in feel. I wanted to make sure I could add in things as well, like laundry. So I've added in the washer and dryer over here in the corner, and this is kind of like a little space that I imagine maybe there never used to be a washer and dryer when the house was first built, so they've kind of just made a space for that tucked away over in the corner, rather than having things like a separate utility room, because I feel like that's something you would add on into a more modern home, or you'd renovate your house to add that in. So I really liked how that looked. And then the kitchen's coming together quite well now. I popped in lots of clutter. I made sure that there was things like the plates on the side next to the sink, they're ready to be washed up. I left the milk carton out next to the kettle, as I wanted to make it look like a cup of tea had just recently been made. And then I did really love the shelving units that come with the laundry day stuff pack. So I used the lower cabinet and then the upper shelves, and I feel as though it's just a great space to store all those things that you use regular in family life. I did place down the cat and dog bowl, or the cat bowls, whatever you want them to be, in the kitchen, but I do end up removing them into this kind of like little back hallway space, and I ended up making that like a whole section that's for the pet stuff, which I thought kind of makes sense a little bit when you've got young children, as well, as you want to keep things like their litter tray and the cat bowls out of the way. So I did end up moving them further along in the build. But we've for now moved on into the dining room, and here you would have seen I used the tool mod. Now I used the tool mod around probably a year or 2 ago, and then when I got my new computer I ended up not having any of my mods or CC. So for a long time I've just pretty much played vanilla. I've downloaded things like MCC, Command Center Hub, and little bits of CC, but I've not really dived back in to downloading my mods. But I recently downloaded the tool mod again and the organized debug mod. Completely forgot my train of thought then. So I recently downloaded them again, and this was kind of the first build where I was back playing around with them, so might not be as smooth, but I do love them for sizing things up and down and pushing them or moving them into place. I feel as though it just gives you a lot more freedom, especially when you're trying to build quite realistic looking houses, to play around and add things in. So here we have got the dining room. Now I did add 1 high chair down in the kitchen area. Kind of thought it's really nice if the older kid has gone to school and the mum or dad is sitting there with the younger toddler at breakfast or lunchtime, they can feed him in the kitchen. But then I did also add down a high chair in the dining room, so that when they have their family meals together, there's a space for the infant or toddler, whichever you are playing with, to eat with you guys as well, which I thought looked quite nice, and it's just a nice little touch. And then I did keep the 4th dining chair and kind of just push it over to the side, because again, it's a very realistic thing that when you buy a table and chair, you buy 4, and then if you have got to use a space at your dining table for the high chair, you don't really just get rid of that 4th chair. You're going to find somewhere for it to go, so that when your toddler grows up, they can then use that chair. So I just popped that over to the corner so it's still there in the build. And then if you don't want to play with high chairs, or you're not playing with toddlers or infants, you can just delete the high chair and pop the chair back and away you go. But now we have moved on into the living room. Something that I loved about this build was I went for this older looking wood flooring, because again, I wanted to imagine they've moved in, they haven't got loads of money to go and add new flooring in all of the rooms, so they've kept the flooring that's already down. And then this older wood flooring, I felt as though I really like this particular swatch, and it goes with so many different styles anyway, but I leaned into it with the dark woods and kind of made sure that I used a lot of darker wood furniture for the more traditional items that would have been there when they bought the house. So I went with things like the fireplace. That was going to have been there when they bought the house, but they've put their TV from their previous home on there. And then I wanted the living room to look really lived in as well. I kind of imagine that this is a space that they spend a lot of time when it is just chilling of an evening, when work's finished, school's finished, dinner time's all done. They're going to sit down and watch a film or maybe play some games. So I kind of tried to make sure to pop down lots of bits and pieces of baby clutter on the table. I did imagine that one of the parents would be a stay-at-home parent. Up in the main bedroom, I did add down a computer, and I kind of imagined maybe the mum's a stay-at-home mum, but she does still do a little bit of part-time work here and there, so there's a computer available for that. You can kind of, if you're actually playing, use things like the gaming or programming option on the computer to make money, or writing, so that was there as an option. But again, I wanted to make that living room look as though that's a space that she'll be chilling with the young infant during the day, just to try and keep in with that little bit of realism. And that's why I love some of the clutter in The Sims, because although you don't get much gameplay out of it from a builder's perspective, it really adds to that realism when you are trying to build, especially a family home. Things like this as well, the little lunchbox, I loved popping this down. It did take a little bit of faff to get it in place, but I know that when my kids walk in through the front door, everything just gets dumped in the hallway, so I kind of just popped down the school bag and the lunchbox there, and I really loved how that turned out. Moving on into the downstairs bathroom. There is 3 bathrooms in this house, because I've got the downstairs bathroom is actually large enough to be considered a family bathroom, but then upstairs I did go in and do a bit more of a family bathroom and kind of made it look a little bit messy with kids' clothes thrown on the floor. But I kind of wanted to imagine that because the mum and dad have guests over, they wanted to make sure the downstairs bathroom looks a little bit neater. But yeah, there is 3 bathrooms, because I did also add on an ensuite into the parents' room as well. But this bathroom, I did keep them all looking fairly similar, because they're not something I enjoy too much doing in The Sims unless I'm doing a more modern style bathroom. But I did quite like how these turned out. Again, I wanted them to have that older look, so I've gone in with these older style flooring, cabinets, and I just went for stone walls. Although I haven't got any of this stone on the outside, which usually I don't bring too much brickwork or stone inside unless it's on the outer walls, I quite liked how this one looked, so I kept with that. It does look a little bit more colder than what I normally would go for in a bathroom, but it would work really well as a family bathroom, easy to keep clean and tidy up. And then again, we've got the potty down there and a bath, so there's options there if you are playing with toddlers or infants. And again, I did still add a touch of clutter and realism to it, but I didn't go too overboard in here, so I wanted to make sure everything was easily accessible. It really annoyed me that I couldn't find 2 pictures that worked well here, so I ended up just going for this one. I wanted to have a little bit more of a bathroom style. Then we've got this little hallway area, which I wasn't quite sure I was going to do anything with, but then I thought this actually made a cool little section for some of the pet stuff that you might want out of the way. So I popped down the litter box, and then I thought I might as well move the cat bowls to there as well. And then obviously the pets have got free roam of the house. Further along in the video, I forgot that I didn't add any pet beds in the downstairs, so I do come in and add 1 or 2 of those and a few more toys and things on the back porch as well. But for now, we've moved on upstairs, and I'm just going to come in and decorate the hallway. I kept this very similar to the downstairs hallway, so things like matching lights, and I grabbed those 2 cabinets. I don't end up adding too much else into the hallway. I think I come along further along and add a mirror in, but I wanted this house, although I wanted it to look cluttered and lived in, I wanted it for gameplay purposes to still be good for rooting. So you know what the Sims are like, they can't get past something, they can be really finicky. So I wanted to make sure that there wasn't any rooting issues when it comes to actually playing, especially when you are playing with 4+ Sims in a house. It can get a bit chaotic. So I tried to bear that in mind for things like the hallway, just keeping them nice and spacious, and for things like getting around the bed and things like that, because the rooms are a nice, decently biggish size, to be quite honest. So it was nice to be able to go in and clutter up a room but still be able to leave plenty of space for gameplay. So on to the master bedroom, I did add a little bit more color in here than what I had done in the previous rooms. Like I said, I kind of imagined that they brought a lot of stuff from their previous house that they lived in, so I've just added that in. And then things like the bedding, I wanted to look a little bit more modern, and the curtains up here. So I did just keep some traditional looking stuff like the rug. I kind of just maybe imagined that that was there, so they kept it. And then again, same with the bathrooms. I kept all the bathrooms looking pretty similar. So I just imagined that this was how they were done when the house was built, but maybe a few more modern things have been added over the years. But this particular family that are living here now, sorry, they're just coming in and adding in their actual furniture rather than making any big changes. I do have a shower in here as well, so if you want to speed up the whole hygiene process, there is a shower available as well as a bath, but I kept that bathroom very simple and very similar to the downstairs one. So we're going to move on into the infant's room, and I really loved this room. I thought it looked super cute. I did imagine them having 2 sons, like I said, but the infant's bedroom, I went with a bit of a neutral theme. So I went with some lemons. I still added in a few touches of blue, but I really loved how it turned out, and I kind of leaned into some of the darker woods in here so it still matched the vibe. But then they've got a few modern pieces, like the armchair looks quite modern. I kind of imagine maybe they moved in here when they were pregnant or their baby was very young, so they've managed to still buy furniture that matches the style of the house. And I just thought it was a really cute room. I don't build too many nurseries in The Sims, so it's definitely something I need to do more of. And I love, since we've got growing together, you have the options of changing tables and things like that. So I made sure to go in, add some of them. The little gym mat, I love how cute and colourful this is, so I wanted to make sure I added in lots of toys and make it look like a very used room. I really wanted to add that wooden light over in the corner, but it just looked a bit dangerous for a toddler or infant's room, so I swapped it out for a more modern one. And then we're going to move on to the final bedroom, which is the son's bedroom. Now, although the children in The Sims don't necessarily have ages, I kind of pictured him being a young child, so maybe he's just gone out of the toddler stage into a child. In real life, I would say I pictured him around 5, so I still popped in lots of toys and things like that, because sometimes when I'm building children's rooms, I will lean into more of an older child and add in things like a computer, or maybe they're into gaming and a TV, where I didn't with this room. I kept it a lot more younger. I added in another one of these, but I'd sized up the one that I placed downstairs, so I wasn't sure if it'd still be playable, so I put a full-size one up here. The little arts and crafts tables are so cute, and I'm so glad that we have so many different ones to choose from. This bedroom isn't huge, but I feel as though it's a nice size for a single child to live in. And then of course, unless you add any more children, they've all got their own separate rooms anyway. So I kind of just went in and added in just a few clutter items. I wanted to make sure that the room felt very much like they'd let the child make it their own room. So I added in some posters on the walls, and then we're going to move on to what would be kind of like the upstairs family bathroom. Originally, I went in with quite a lot of counters on here, and I felt as though it was just taking up unnecessary space, so I swapped them out for just having the 2. I popped in the shower tub combo here because I feel as though it just gives off that proper traditional family house vibe, so I popped that down, and then just some towels and bits and bobs. I imagine that mum uses this bathroom a lot to get the kids ready and bathed and all things like that, or maybe the dad, whichever parent. So I popped in lots of random clutter bits for getting the children ready, and kind of just left the bathroom as maybe that's just the kids' bathroom. And then lastly, we're just going to add in a few more little bits into the hallway to finish that off. I do then go in, like I said, and add in a few more pet objects. I just felt as though there wasn't enough beds. And then I moved on into the back garden. So we're going to come into the back garden. I ended up adding on a few more trees just to make it feel a little bit more like they live in the countryside. So for this build, I'm building in Sequoia. I haven't actually played much in that area or that world, so I don't really know too much sort of what vibe it has. But because I was building a British house, I kind of imagine they live in the British countryside. So I wanted to make sure I added in lots of greenery and flowers. I wanted to make sure I added in lots of greenery and flowers around the build to give it a bit of a, maybe not countryside, maybe more like just the outskirts of a city look. So it's got a bit suburban feel to it. And then here I decided to try and just fit in as much fun items for the kids for spring and summer, because we're in spring right now, and I feel as though already, as soon as the sun comes out, we've got so much use of our garden. So I wanted to make sure that I could come in The Sims and kind of replicate that. So I ended up adding in a pool, which I wanted to make it look like a inflatable, or not inflatable pool, but you know, the ones you pop up in summer and take down when the weather goes crap. So I wanted to put in one of those pools and kind of make it look as though it's not something that stays there all year round, because you're definitely not getting much use out of a pool in the autumn and winter months. But then I decided to add in the smaller infant one there as well for the younger child that's in the house, and then just some fun bits and bobs. So we've got the water bomb bucket, the basketball hoop, just so that there's some really fun activities. Because we're in spring here, it just made me feel like putting effort into the garden and making it a space that the Sims can really use. Like I said, I imagine that they come from a new build, maybe a new build flat, so they never had a garden before. So now they've all gone all out in adding lots of fun things to do in the garden. I did also add down some pots, so the adult Sims can get the gardening skill if you wish. And then we're just going to finish up the front of the house, and then that does bring us towards the end of the video. So for the front, I popped down the swing set because I wanted to put that in the back garden, but there just wasn't much room for it, so I decided to add it out the front. And then I just come in and change to a stone pathway, because like I said, I'd lost the terrain paint, which was just gravel anyway, so I ended up going in for a stone one. And then I was going to fence off this side where the swing set is, but I decided to go in and kind of make it look like bark or wood chippings instead. So I fenced off the driveway and the stone, and then I just come in with terrain paint and change up this section. I went with gravel and kind of didn't like it, and I thought this just looked a little bit more natural for the area. And then I just framed it with lots of these low-lying shrubs and lots of kind of like wild looking plants that are growing around. So then we just finish off by adding in some of those here and there to just finish the build. Now I really hope you all enjoyed this. I am going to sit now and play test this and give it a good play test, and then I will upload it onto the Sims 4 gallery. So by the time this video goes live, it should already be on the gallery if you would like to download it. I will leave all the information for that in the description box below, but for now I will leave you with the screenshots. Thank you all so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, please do give it a thumbs up, leave me a comment below, and hit that subscription button if you haven't already. Lots of love, take care, bye bye.